So for the last couple of weeks, we've been exploring the theme of raising children in a secular world, that wonderful privilege that God has given to human beings to participate in what he's doing. He is filling the world with people who are designed to worship him. And he's given us this astonishing privilege of being mums and dads and of being part of a church family with children in it to nurture and train and raise them. And the problem is it's not easy because we're opposed not just by our own sinful desires but by the secular culture around us. And so we need to think clearly and biblically, how do we approach this? First week, 2 weeks ago, we just thought about the very simple question, whose job is it? Whose responsibility is it to raise children? And the answer is very simple. It is the responsibility of parents in the context of a local church to raise their children. So we must resist the tendency of an often well-meaning but ultimately misguided state to claim ownership of our children. I don't think our civil rulers want to do us harm. I do think they often overreach themselves, and particularly in this matter of raising and educating and training children. Second week, this was last week. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? Now that we know that it's our job, where are we trying to get to? What's the destination? The answer is to raise new human beings, to participate fruitfully in what we call the cultural mandate, God's plan to fill the world with people to worship him and to honour him faithfully and to his glory. And to do so within stable families. Families are the primary unit within society for the formation of new people. And again, our sinful world and even the sinful desires of our own hearts resist God's plan for the world. So inevitably you have a conflict. None of this is coasting downstream. All of it is paddling upstream against the current, against the tide, and perhaps against an increasingly strong and vigorous and dangerous tide in the days in which we live. So that's where we're going. How do we get there? How do we get there? The challenge today is for us to address, what should we actually do in practice? I'm aware, as Steve's been leading the discussions in forum after the service, a lot of the questions that you've been asking have been like practical questions. What are we supposed to do? Like, I'm a dad, I'm a mum, or I'm a big brother or a big sister, or you're just a member of the church, and you're thinking, what should we actually be involved in doing to raise our children in this way? And the answer for that is found back in Ephesians 6, in verse 4, a wonderful, condensed, thought-provoking, challenging instruction on parenting. We want to leave behind our cultural critique of the messed up world and fix our attention on what we need to do, okay? Everybody else we might think is making life difficult, but in the end, the responsibility begins and ends with us. And so we need to take seriously these words. Chapter 6, verse 4, Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Let me make just a brief comment on where this comes in the letter. You probably know that the book of Ephesians is broken roughly into two halves. The first half, chapters 1 to 3, declares that God, the Father, is bringing all things in heaven and on earth under the loving rule of Jesus Christ. That's what history is for, to display the glory of Christ by him being in charge of everything. And chapters 4 to 6 then say, in practice, what's happening in history is this plan is being worked out in the church as men and women and children voluntarily say, Jesus, we want you to be king over us. You see what's happened? The church is a microcosm of how the world is supposed to be. People voluntarily placing themselves under the loving instruction of Jesus Christ. And then in chapters 5 and 6, you get some practical outworkings of this. It's intriguing. If you really... The context for chapter 6, verse 4 goes all the way back to chapter 5, verse 18. Just flick back a page with me, and because it's intriguing and it's quite important. Don't get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. Two alternatives. Don't get drunk with wine. That's just debauchery, recklessness, sinfulness. Instead, alternative, be filled with the Spirit. And that imperative, that instruction is then fleshed out in 5 ways. If you're a grammar nerd, like I am a little bit, it's 5 participles, and you can see them even in the English translation. Addressing one another, psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing, making melody, giving thanks, verse 21, submitting to one another. So the way to be filled with the Spirit is in these 5 ways. That's what a Spirit-filled life would look like. And of course, submitting to one another, well, that's interesting. How do we submit to one another? That 5th participle the final little sub-instruction is then fleshed out in chapter 5, verse 22, all the way through to halfway through chapter 6, in 3 sets of relationships. How do husbands and wives submit to one another? How do children and parents submit to one another? And then verse 5 and following, how do slaves and masters submit to one another? Now, what does all that mean? Why did I drag you through the Greek kind of participle clauses? The reason is this, very important. What we are talking about today is a picture of the Spirit-filled family. This is how a family is to be filled with the Spirit of God. Be filled with the Spirit. 5 ways. The 5th of which, submitting. This is how the submission is supposed to work. This is how the sense of responsibility and initiative is supposed to work. And in the end, it lands on the head of chapter 6, verse 4. Fathers. So that's where we'll begin. We've got 4 brief, I hope, points to flesh out from this verse. And the 4 phrases I want to highlight are in your service sheets if you want to follow along. But the first one's very simple. The first word, fathers. The responsibility for a family's life does not rest with mum and dad. It rests with dad. Paul is very capable of saying parents or mothers and fathers if he means mothers and fathers, but here he specifically addresses fathers. Unlike in verse 2 and 3, where he says father and mother or parents. It's very clear then that he wants dads to go, well, who, me? And he's going to say, yes, you. The primary responsibility rests there. And of course, this is what every single mum knows. Actually, I grew up in a single-parent family for 4 years. And so I saw in my mum's struggles the hardship she faced by having to pick up 2 jobs, including one which wasn't kind of not one that she's designed for. So when we see families that are struggling because of that, that's all the more the case because they're missing, either through death, as in the case of my dad, or in other tragic family breakdown kind of situations, they're missing the dad who is so necessary for the proper functioning of the Christian family, fathers. But then notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, dads, lay the law down. Dad, okay, this is father, because the way that fathers tend to operate is slightly clumsy, isn't it? I know, I speak as one. And it's like, we very, very quickly buy into this worldly pattern of authority. When somebody tells you that you're in charge, you say, right, okay, time to get to business. No, that's not what Paul says. That's not what he says. Christian fatherhood is modelled on whose fatherhood? God's fatherhood. It's back in chapter 3, verses 14 and 15, you have a kind of word play. The fatherhood I won't look in detail at it. I bow my knees before the Father, our Father, from whom every family, the word for family, it means family here, but it's a kind of clever little Greek word play on father. So it's as if our families, supposed to be shaped by the Father's initiative, chapter 6, verse 4, the Father's supposed to look around and think, where would I find my model for being a godly father? Oh yeah, I know. Not the guy who bosses everybody about, but the guy who has a perfect plan for all of our lives. Where are the fathers who have a perfect plan for all their children? Our Heavenly Father has a perfect plan for all his children. Where's the father who is loving, who always is concerned for what's good for his children? Our Heavenly Father is like that. Where's the father who takes the initiative, who doesn't sort of sit around watching us wallowing in our sin, but takes the initiative to sort the mess out? That's our Heavenly Father. That's what human fathers are supposed to be like. Generous and patient and forgiving and gentle. That is the kind of initiative, responsibility we are called to take. The responsibility rests with us. And I'll tell you, I was preparing this during the week, and I started writing an email to a couple of the dads here. I won't tell you who, to say, guys, I wonder whether we could get together to pray about being better dads, because I felt so convicted. Every time I preach on this verse, and I've preached on it a few times over the years, I feel like, what are my kids going to say when they hear me saying this? And I know what they're going to say, actually. They'll say, really? Is this what you're supposed to be like? Because we all know, but we can't walk away from this. We mustn't egalitarianize it away. It just isn't what we'd like it to say. It places the responsibility so squarely with us. Now, practically, how are we going to do this? Look, I think families are all very different. I mean, look around. I mean, you've got some families with young children, some families with older children, some families with no children, some families with children brewing. We've got all kinds of different situations and different abilities, different gifts. We're in different financial situations. We have different homes. Everything is different. And one of the things that the dad has got to do is to sit back and think, okay, well, what's our situation? Where are we? And what's the best thing that we could do just to make things here as good and godly and fruitful as they could possibly be? And I was just thinking, what have been the influences that have shaped me over the years that I want to be shaped by? There have been some bad influences, my own fault. But on the blue sheet, I've actually put some resources for parents. Let me just mention a couple of these. These are one way, dads, to take the initiative is to say, you know what, I have no idea how to make Sundays a really wonderful, restful, beautiful day. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to study that. Here's a book by Stuart Bryan, The Taste of Sabbath, which will help you to think about how to make Sunday such a blessing to your family. Or if you're thinking, how can I encourage my wife to generate and create family traditions which will cement around the meal table and in the way that we interact with each other, that will cement the kinds of culture that we want to have in our family. Noel Piper's book, Treasuring God in Our Traditions. Noel Piper is John Piper's wife. John Piper, American Baptist preacher, great guy, wonderful preacher, wonderful theologian, and this wonderful wife, Noel Piper, who's written this fantastic book, inspiring book. Now look, there are loads of books here. Please don't tell me, dads, you have no idea what to do. You have about 9 ideas now what to do. And there's a little book review for each one. Now, dads, who's supposed to do this? Not me. For you. You are supposed to do this. This is your job. How? And I found this little picture of a dad in a darkened room, sitting up late at night with a book open, thinking, how am I going to do this? It's my job. God has given me this tremendous responsibility. And when I see things aren't how they should be, that lands here. That's what I need to do. Take the initiative. If you want a parenting course, don't wait for me to advertise a parenting course. Come and ask for one. Yeah? If you want some specific advice, come give me a call. Call Nick, call Steve, call somebody. Pray, do something. If you want that prayer meeting, it's Lent, isn't it? Let's have a prayer meeting for dads. Wouldn't it be great? You want to do that? Send me a text. Let's organise it. If you think you're perfect and you don't need that, that's fine. Let's not. Of course we don't. Yeah. Let's aspire, dads, to be the best we can possibly be. Now, this doesn't mean, we're going to come back to this a bit later on, this doesn't mean do it all yourself. Okay? Obviously, huge amounts of what goes on with your children is done by other people. It's delegated. But let's make sure we delegate, don't abdicate. Yeah? Delegate, don't abdicate. So, huge amount of the time with your children is spent by your wife, right? But that's not all. There are other people. There are people who lead brownies and scouts. There are sports coaches. Maybe there are teachers at school, or there are music teachers on the weekend or whatever. All of these things, these are other people to whom you're delegating the responsibility of raising the children, except you're not delegating the responsibility, you're delegating the practical task. The responsibility remains yours. What do you know about what they're learning? What do you know about the language that your son's football coach uses? You happy with that? It might be that that's okay. But it might be you need to make sure you're talking with your son about it to make sure that he doesn't pick up that language and start... You see what I'm saying? The responsibility never leaves you. Yeah? Delegate, but don't abdicate. Fathers are responsible for their families. Second, back in Ephesians 6:4, fathers, what's the first thing that we're urged not to do? Don't wind your kids up. Don't frustrate them. Don't exasperate them. Or as the ESV puts it very well, don't provoke your children to anger. It's astonishingly... My son, why are you laughing, Ben? Yeah, okay. Let me explain what this means. See, it's very realistic. Isn't the Bible realistic about highlighting, as soon as it gives you something which is likely to challenge you, to show you what could go wrong? To exasperate or to provoke to anger is a fairly common verb in the Bible. It's used 50, 60 times. by far the most common use in the Scriptures is in relation to provoking the Lord to anger by idolatry. The kings of Israel in the books of Kings, 1 and 2 Kings, are again and again said to have provoked the Lord to anger by abandoning him, by putting something else other than the Lord first. And what happens is that this will go on for a while, during the reign of the king. And then towards the end of the reign of the king, the Lord will just, finally, it's as if you can feel his emotion. He is provoked to a righteous indignation by the fact that the one whom he's placed in charge has put something other than his priorities first. He provoked the Lord to anger. Now, wouldn't it be a tragedy if your kids got to 18, 19, 20 and they looked back and they just felt let down and frustrated and they had that same sense of disappointment and anguish that the Lord expresses? Why have you done this, Dad? Dad, why have you let me down? Dad, why didn't you put the Lord's ways first? Wouldn't that be horrible if the same frustration that the Lord felt with an idolatrous and sinful king, our kids felt with us? This is when it started to haunt me during the preparation. This is when I started to write the email. I haven't sent it yet. Maybe I'll chat to somebody after coffee. Now, how do you frustrate a child? Children? Anybody? No, there are loads of ways to frustrate a child, aren't they? Oh, go on then, Charity, tell us. Does he? That's because he loves you, Charity. It's funny. You see, here the obvious way. So you can just get cross, can't you? And especially when you're tired and your harshness and outbursts of anger. But the long-term drip feed of never having enough time for your kids. I remember somebody once telling me, he's a dad, father of 5 now. He said, you've got to waste time with your children. What you can't do is say, okay, son, you've got 35 minutes, quality time. No, you've got to just muck around with them. You've got to just be there in a way that you're not for other people. Otherwise, they just figure out, well, I'm just like everybody else. No, I'm less important because when I ask for something, I get a kind of, yeah, whatever. And when somebody else phones, it's like, yes, hi. No, because autobiographical again. Because we won't have time for them. Less obvious ways, though, arbitrariness, changing standards, inconsistent standards, hypocritical standards, expecting our kids to do stuff we won't do for ourselves. Hey, dads, who takes the bins out in your household? Okay, so 2 sons just put their hands up. Dads, have you ever taken the bins out? Yeah, good. Right. So when they don't, yeah, no, it's interesting. If eldest son will pretty soon figure out that he's the one getting all the grubby jobs while you sit with your feet up having a beer. Yeah. And of course, son needs to do some of the grubby jobs, but the father who won't pitch in and lead the way. Sometimes I have these horrible, frustrating conversations with parents, sometimes Christian parents, often not Christian parents, and they're frustrated with something about their kids, and I don't know what to say because I don't want to be rude, I don't want to appear judgmental. I just look at the parents and I think, yeah, I wonder where they got that from. My kid always flies off the handle. He's really angry the whole time. And it makes me so mad. Like, yes. I wonder where he learned that. Our kids are fantastic mirrors. You want to know what you're like? Look at your son. I don't just mean the hair. It's scary. It's really scary. There's the easiest way to frustrate a child. This is a slow burn, long-term, but 100% guaranteed way to make your child furious with you. Do you know what it is? No boundaries. No boundaries. Let me tell you a story. With Nicole's permission, I asked if I could. When we first met, she told me this story about her and a friend of hers. Nicole has delightful, lovely parents. Her friend is not so blessed. And when they were teenagers, they were cycling home one evening after they'd been out with their friends. Maybe she was 16, 17 years old. And they're cycling home, and Nicole's on her bike going, tearing up the hill. And her friend's like lagging behind saying, Nicole, what's the rush? What are you rushing for? And Nicole said, I've got to be back by 10 o'clock. Mum and Dad said I've got to be back by 10 o'clock. You know what her friend said? I wish my parents cared about what time I came home. I met her for the first time a few years later. She was so angry about her parents. No boundaries, no rules. It's so frustrating for a child to have parents who don't care enough to even want to know when they're coming back from being out with their friends. It's as if they think, do whatever you like. Children, one of the things that you need to understand about godly parents is that they give you rules, and we're trying, some of us, all of us are trying in different ways. We give you these boundaries because we love you. A father disciplines the son he loves. Please don't resent it now. You won't resent it in the future, I promise you, if your parents are concerned now about giving you boundaries. Firstly, it's because they love you. Secondly, you will thank them. I promise. You will thank them. The easiest way to drive a child nuts is to let them run riot. It just takes 15 or 16 years for it to show. Third, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but what's the alternative? Instead of making them frustrated, instead of making them angry, it is bring them up. I want to pause there. We'll look at the final clause in a moment. Bring them up. The fundamental feature of parenting is highlighted here, and it is that parenting is a long-term process. When Nathan tells the parable to King David about the sheep, the man with one sheep, with Uriah and Bathsheba and all that mess, and he said, "No, I'm telling you a parable, David." There was a man who had a sheep, and the same Greek verb is used in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. He brought it up, he cared for it, he nurtured it, he loved it, and he didn't just give it a ton of food and say, "Make your way through that, see you in 5 years." Every day he cared. That's what bring up means. It's a long-term process. Hebrews 12 verse 11. All discipline seems painful at the time, painful for everyone, but later on it produces the fruit of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. Later on. The whole process of discipling a child produces fruit later, not now. Now, I've got to tell you, parents, if you don't get this, I don't want to be rude, your home will be a catastrophe. Because the easiest thing to do when you're parenting, we all know, is to take the path of least resistance, isn't it? That the easiest thing to do at any one time is just to give the kid what they want. One girl I went to college with she had her first baby, and I sort of lost touch. I heard this sort of secondhand for a friend. She had her first baby, and within about 5 or 6 weeks, she was nearly hospitalised with hallucinations, the mum. And it turned out the reason was that every time her baby cried, whimpered, grunted, grumbled, she was so determined not to let her experience anything that approached tears that she would wake up, go into the next room, pick her up and rock her to sleep. So she had like 0 sleep, pretty much, for 5 weeks. She ended up nearly hospitalised. Now, how do you resist that? You resist that impulse by thinking short-term pain for me, for the child, long-term gain. Bring them up is a long-term process. Let's get practical. Okay. How many of you have had the experience of a mealtime where it just dawns on you, he won't eat whatever it is. Yeah, he only wants to eat, what is it? Crunchy nut cornflakes and chocolate spread. Children. Okay, here's a strange thing. We think our child is unique because he only likes pizza. Children, how many of you like broccoli? Right, didn't think so. How many of you like chocolate spread? Pizza? Yeah, you see, right? So they'd eat chocolate spread and pizza, or preferably pizza with chocolate spread on it, for every meal. So if you have a parent, if you have a situation, you give them a bowl of pasta, and they throw it on the floor, and you think, oh, he won't eat pasta. Yes, he will eat pasta. He will. Okay, there's nothing. It's not got broken glass in it. He will eat it. It just needs you to make him eat it. So how do you do this? How do you do this? They need to be trained to eat the stuff you want them to eat. And now, let's use the example of eating. The kids, you're going to hate me for this. We're doing Sunday school. You're going to be throwing chairs at me. It's too bad. the example of eating applies everywhere else, absolutely everywhere else, but we'll run with eating because it's kind of entertaining. So you give them this bowl of pasta and they throw it on the floor. Yeah, because for breakfast they had bread with chocolate spread on it and they liked that. So what do? Well, you pick it up and you give it back to them. And you discipline them. We'll talk about that another time. And you pray with them and you explain, Johnny, this is what's for dinner today. You're going to eat this. Now what do they do next? You may answer. What do they do next? Throw it on the floor again. So what do? You pick it up. You never, ever, ever back down. Like, who's in charge here? Who's in charge? And what you don't do, and this is the classic thing, we all are tempted by this. Say, look, okay, Johnny, here's the pasta. Eat your pasta, and then you can have some bread with chocolate spread on it. Because what are you teaching them? You're not teaching them to obey their parents. You're teaching them to bribe their parents. You're teaching them that they can basically negotiate their way through life by getting what you want them to have, if and only if you give them what they want. And that's not teaching them to obey their parents at all. Never, ever back down. You want to teach your children, don't you, that they should do what you say because you say? Do you think you know better for your children than they do? I hope you do. In which case, you must want them to do what you say simply because you've said it. And what that means is you're going to have frustrating, short-term pain meal times for, I estimate, between 1 and 3 weeks. You can have 1 to 3 weeks of frustrating meal times now, or you can have a teenager who won't do what you say because you've said it. You can have 3 weeks now, or the teenage years of chaos. And you have to choose. What you can't have is a perfect child. There are no perfect children. You have a child who needs long-term training. And fourthly and finally, what do they need long-term training in? The final little phrase, in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Let me say a word or two about this. This highlights the areas of life, the particular aspects of a child's character and life and understanding and so on, that are involved in raising kids. Now, we've focused on a few slightly trivial examples, what you eat, this kind of thing, what time you come back if you've been out. But actually, the biblical mandate for children is much broader. It covers everything, basically, here categorized as discipline and instruction. Discipline does not just mean telling a child off. It doesn't mean telling a child off. Think of it in relation to discipling. Raising a child with the godly, wise, disciplined, faithful, joyful approach to life that they should have. You look at this, you dig around in the Old Testament for the Greek Old Testament for this word, paideia. You know, you find it about 50, 60 times. More than half of them are in one book. Guess which book it is? Proverbs. So, discipline is Proverbs-shaped life. It's the life that understands the world. It's the life that enjoys life. It's the life that understands other people. It's the life that's determined to begin with fearing God and put everything else second. That's discipline. It's the practical wisdom and attitudes and motivations which govern everything else. Instruction is related to the Greek word for the mind. It has to do more with teaching, perhaps with academic stuff, perhaps more kind of formal training. It's used actually in 1 Corinthians 10 to refer to warnings. So it's kind of, okay, you need to be careful, this might go wrong. It does have a negative warning element to it, but it's principally to do with intellectual growth, training, teaching. So just add those things up. What you know in your mind, instruction, and all the wise ways of living and being motivated and driven along in life, discipline. Well, that's pretty much everything, isn't it? There are no neutral areas. Every single aspect of our life is to be brought into conformity with what? Discipline and instruction of the Lord. The question all the time is, how can I raise my children in such a way that they're like the Lord Jesus? Or, how can I raise my children in such a way that what I'm saying to them is what the Lord would be saying to them? in terms of their intellectual formation, their academic study, their personal maturity? Are they the kind of kid who, if Jesus were here physically in his body, he's here by his spirit, obviously, if he were here physically, is your teaching, which you're either giving yourself or delegating to somebody else, the sort of thing that Jesus would have done? Then it's the discipline and instruction of the Lord. If not, it's some other kind of discipline and instruction. Practical instincts, attitudes and desires, all these things. And we mustn't compartmentalize. We mustn't look around in horror at all the secular influences in the world and think it's okay. Because Monday to Saturday we can drown them in that stuff, and then Sunday we can just bring them along to church and dump a dollop of Christian sauce on top, and it'll make it all taste good. Now, what you'll have, it'll be like kind of shepherd's pie with custard. It's like you have confused children. All of life, every aspect of life is to be brought into conformity to the teaching of the Scriptures and the model of the Lord Jesus Christ. So remember, dads, delegate, don't abdicate. So you know about all the different places that your kids go. You could, this afternoon, sit down and just think through all the people they meet, all the different teaching, formal and informal, they get, all the different examples that they see on TV, all the different kids they play with at sports teams and stuff. Now, sports, well, you've got all that catalogue in your mind. How happy are you with that? There are some ungodly influences there, aren't there? That's not necessarily a disaster, but we need to ask the question, are they ready for that yet? By the time a young man is 17, 18 years old, he's ready for the secular world, you hope. By the time a child is 3 months old, they're not ready. So raising a child is the process of training them so that they will be ready. Are you exposing them to too much too young? Or do you just not know what they're being exposed to? Or are you trying to keep them locked in the broom cupboard under the stairs because you're so scared they might meet a non-Christian? All those things are wrong. Really what we need to do is to be taking seriously our responsibility for raising and training our children. And just keep asking that question. Is the thing that we are now doing the best thing that we could come up with? Remember we started, I said a few minutes ago, all your families are different. All your families are different. So you will come up with different answers to the key question, but this is the key question you must ask. What's the best that I, as a dad, that we, as a family, could do to raise this little girl, this little boy, for the 17, 18 years that the Lord has given him or her to be with us? What's the best that we could do, given who we are, to raise them to be like Jesus? And once you figure that out, then go ahead and do it.